So right now in the current national environment, there's a lot happening, as you can well imagine, as you probably have been hearing in the news. Sometimes the education piece and the financial aid piece might go under the radar compared to a lot of the other headlines that are in the news these days, but there is a lot happening. So some of the new things, new updates that we have to share, and feel free to ask questions in the chat feature as we go. And if there's anything that I can't answer for you today on the webinar, we'll certainly get answers for you and email those out to you as well. So one big change that has happened recently, and this has been happening over the course of the past year under the Trump administration, is that gainful employment regulations, which are aimed to make career training programs that prove that graduates can find jobs. So it's basically set up to make sure that students who are going through college or getting an education are able to get something for their money. They're able to get jobs after college. So those regulations are actually becoming a little less strict on colleges. A lot of these regulations were put into place or strengthened because of a lot of the issues we're seeing over the past few years with a lot of the particularly for-profit colleges where students were not actually able to get their degrees, schools were closing, and they were left with a mountain of debt and no way to get a job or even their degree. So there was a lot of issues surrounding that, and right now we're seeing those regulations that had become more strict are actually becoming less strict right now under the new administration. So borrowers who formerly had loans that were forgiven when these particular schools used deceptive tactics to get them to borrow to enroll in their school, they're actually going to have a little bit harder time getting those loans forgiven. So we'll see how it all shakes out, but in general, these students, it's not going to be, I guess, as clean and easy to get these loans forgiven. It's going to be a little bit more strict, a little bit more difficult for these students. The new tax bill does limit the state income tax deductions that also may pressure states to lower their own taxes and give less money to state colleges. So that we might see that also turn into higher costs for students. So sorry, I'm sharing not very good news right now. But state income tax deductions, because there's limits on those, states aren't going to have as much tax revenue, so they may have less money to give to state colleges. So where we may see the trickle-down effect with higher costs to students in the end. There is a legislation that's in the works that's under consideration called the Prosper Act that recommends significant changes in financial aid funding. So we'll go over that on the next slide, but just a couple of other points that I wanted to make here. So policy analysts anticipate that some states will flatten or dial back funding for higher education in anticipation of that lower tax revenue because of this new federal tax law. The impact of the law may not be felt for another year in some cases, but the cap on state and local tax deductions could eventually place a strain on state budgets and in turn public colleges and universities. So critics of this tax overall say it could raise taxes overall for people, particularly in high tax states such as New York and California. Massachusetts probably falls, pretty close after them. We're not quite as high as them, but which would place pressure on states to hold the line or cut their own taxes to compensate. So less revenue means less appropriations, which in turn, that trickle-down effect can mean less resources for students in state schools. So obviously cutting funding to public colleges and universities has been a popular solution in times of revenue constraints because schools can use their tuition to offset the loss of state dollars. So again, for those who are just joining us, I just want to let you know that we are recording this webinar. So we will send a copy of it along with a copy of the PowerPoint to you after the webinar. And feel free to ask questions in the chat feature as we go. I won't be able to hear you if you're talking out loud, but I will be able to answer your questions via chat. And if there's anything I can't answer, we'll definitely get the questions for you answered in an email after the webinar. So just a little bit more about the PROSPER Act. Now this hasn't gone into effect yet. It is a recommendation, but it is a bill to reauthorize the Higher Education Act. So every few years we expect that the Higher Education Act should be reauthorized, but that doesn't always happen. Sometimes it could be anywhere from 8 to 10 years that the Higher Education Act is reauthorized, sometimes even longer. But right now, so now we do have a bill on the books, or a proposed bill to reauthorize the Higher Education Act. It still needs approval from Congress, which is going to be a very, very big step, as we know with other pieces of legislation we've seen, especially the tax bill and healthcare. We've seen some battles over that, so we'll see what happens with the Higher Education Act. But just a couple of details of what this legislation will propose is that there'll be a Pell Grant bonus for students who enroll in at least 15 credits, so encouraging students to take more classes, intern, graduate, probably hopefully on time, get out of school a little bit earlier, intern, save some money there. Increase federal student loan limits from $5,500 to $7,500. Placing federal loan limits on how much graduate students and parents could borrow. So we're talking about the Federal Plus loan here. So graduate students can right now can borrow a plus loan above and beyond their federal direct student loan to cover what's missing. Parents can also borrow their plus loan to cover their cost of attendance minus financial aid, similar to, a MEFA loan or any other type of education loan. But with limits being put on these loans, there's going to be an issue where there's still going to be a gap for families that need to fill that gap if they're borrowing a plus loan and there's limits on what they can borrow. That might cause some confusion and some issues for families. On the other hand, some could argue that it could help, decrease debt for students and parents, particularly maybe parents who maybe shouldn't be borrowing so much if their credit isn't great or they don't have income. Because right now with plus loans, as you may know, it's not too difficult to get a plus loan. You don't even need to be working or have income. So it is a little bit easier to get a plus loan than most credit-based loans. So there is some concern about default rates on these loans and what could happen in the future. So that's where the limits are coming from. More funds, hopefully, in the works for undergraduate work study, so students can work and earn a little bit more to help support their cost of tuition and miscellaneous expenses, books, supplies, things of that nature. Federal aid will be distributed in bi-weekly allotments. Federal loan repayment. Now, this is a big, big change. The options right now will be reduced from 8 options to 2. So there's a lot of concern that there are so many options for repayment that it can be really confusing, and a lot of students aren't taking advantage of all the great repayment options that are out there for them to keep them on track, to keep them from being late in their payments. So there's proposals to change it from 8 options in the current form to 2 options. Now keep in mind that this still needs to go through negotiation, so some of this could change, and so we'll see what happens. But this is this is a big change, changing these repayment options. Removal of public service loan forgiveness for new borrowers. So that is also a big one. So students who right now are maybe thinking of public service careers, if this does go through, we really need to change our focus and not play up public service loan forgiveness too much in the early stages when students are looking at colleges. They should not be borrowing too much thinking, oh, well, I'll just get my loans forgiven, because that option may not be there for them, particularly for students who are high school juniors or seniors right now. So we want to, be careful about what we're saying right now with those students, just in case that does go away. But right now it's still on the books, and hopefully it'll be grandfathered in for those who are eligible now and for current borrowers. But the proposal is to remove it for new borrowers. So there is, a lot more to the Act, and I'd be happy to send, if anybody wants a copy, I can send I have a 3-page document that I can email everybody that has an overview of the Act in a little bit more detail. So if you want that, just send me a chat through the text feature if anybody's interested, and I can send that along with the copy of the recording as well. And again, this is a proposal. We know it needs to go through negotiation. A lot can happen, but these are pretty big changes to our current system. So let's talk about changes that have come out from the new tax bill that was just passed at the end of the year. So what changed? Lots of big changes here. So this first bullet here, this is a really big change. Up to $10,000 can be withdrawn from a 529 savings plan for K through 12 private school expenses. So that is a big change. So right now, you're probably aware that 529 college savings accounts, such as the U Fund through MEFA, it's strictly for college expenses. But with this new law, families who have 529 accounts can use up to $10,000 of it for high school expenses. So if you have a student who, needs to go to private school for the last couple of years, or they're in high school, or they have a younger student who might need to be enrolled in a private school for whatever reason, wherever they live, that might be a better option for the student, they do have the ability to use up to $10,000 of this tax-free money to pay for private school expenses. So that is a big change. Another big change, and these are, this is another good change to benefit families, is that when loans are forgiven due to death or disability, so we're talking about federal loans, they're no longer going to be taxed. So the estate or the person with the disability will no longer be taxed on that loan. So that is a good benefit for borrowers. Or unfortunately, if somebody were to pass away, their estate would not be taxed. Interest on home equity loans will no longer be deductible. So that's a big one too. I know that for myself, when I'm talking to families, one of the most common questions I get when we're talking about how to pay the bill is, why wouldn't I just use a home equity loan at a lower rate and deduct the interest to pay for college expenses? Well, now you can't deduct that interest on the home equity loan if you're using it for college. It will no longer be deductible. So if you're using the home equity loan, that interest is no longer deductible. So that's not as great a benefit for families. They might still be able to get a low rate, and it might still be a good deal for them. We always encourage families to look at all their options if they do need to borrow. But that interest on home equity loans will no longer be deductible. And this is a pretty popular way that families pay for college, is using home equity loans. If they can get a great rate and they know they can pay it off if they need to access their equity, it can be a powerful tool for some families. So there'll be no more exemptions for dependents. Instead, there's going to be a higher standard deduction and a child tax credit. So sort of swapping those out a little bit. So I do want to put out the call. If anybody has any questions, please write those questions in the chat feature, and we'll answer those as we go. So some things didn't change. There was a lot of concern going into these negotiations on the tax bill that some of these benefits could go away. So some of the things that did not change or were not taken away were the American Opportunity Tax Credit, Lifetime Learning Credit, the tax exemption for graduate student tuition waivers, which is really great, something that a lot of us maybe have taken advantage of in the past, and the student loan interest deduction. That was a big talking point if you were following the negotiations closely, as the student loan interest deduction was on the chopping block for a while there, and there was concern. But I think it was just being used as a negotiation tool, and thankfully that was not taken off. Okay, and I did just get a request for the Prosper Act summary, so I will send that to everybody with the PowerPoint. Okay, so those are some of the big federal updates. I'm going to move into financial aid related matters a little bit more, get into the weeds a little bit more about resources for families and some financial aid updates. So feel free to stop me if I went too fast with those regulatory updates. We really just wanted to hit the highlights and not get too deep in the weeds, but just let you know some of the big things that are happening at the federal level. Okay, so when families are applying for financial aid, and I know we tell counselors this and we tell families and students this all the time, but we can't say it enough, and we'll continue to hit this nail over the head over and over again, is the deadlines are so critical right now. Schools' budgets are not endless. They're sometimes shut off if students don't meet deadlines. Sometimes colleges are not able to give students some of their own financial aid if they haven't met their deadline because they've just run out of resources. So they have to prioritize to students who have gotten their applications in on time. Very important for students and families to know for every school that the student is applying to, what is their application deadline, which usually they're pretty much on top of that, but also what is their financial aid deadline. It can be a little confusing and overwhelming how this whole process works, so I try to explain it as two processes happening at the same time. You have your admissions application with all the pieces that need to go to the admissions office and your deadlines there, and then you have the financial aid process that's also happening at the same time on a parallel track with a different office, and that has its own deadlines and its own forms and its own documents that you need to submit. So they really do need to be investigated, and students need to know what those deadlines are, and parents need to know. They need to know what forms each college is going to require, and they need to know not just for the regular decision what the deadline is for financial aid, but often if students are applying early action or early decision, the financial aid deadline for those students are even earlier. So we know that students can apply for financial aid as of October 1st. So they should be able to get their financial aid applications in more than enough time to meet all these deadlines. Most applications are due for regular admissions, financial aid applications in February or March, and that's typically going to be before the admissions deadline decisions are mailed or emailed. So it's important for families to know, don't wait until you know if you've gotten into a school before you apply for financial aid. Anytime they can apply online, they should be doing that. There's a lot of skip logic built into these applications to cut down errors, make the process easier, quicker, and mistake-free. Also important for families to remember that they have to apply for financial aid every year. A lot of colleges that I talk to find that college sophomores tend to be the group that misses deadlines on financial aid the most because they don't realize that they have to apply every year. So they're not really paying attention the second year. So it's important that they know that going in. So who is eligible for federal and state aid? Right now, U.S. citizens and eligible non-citizens are eligible for federal and state aid. Not eligible are our undocumented students, including DACA students. Here in Massachusetts, DACA students are eligible for in-state tuition, however. So that is good news for students here in Massachusetts. DACA students, particularly if maybe they can start out at community college, they're pretty much paying cash unless they can get some scholarships at the local level. And many colleges also have scholarships, particularly for undocumented students. I saw an article the other day, I want to say it was Jeff Bezos that was going to be setting up a scholarship fund for undocumented students. So, there's a lot of good people out there who are creating scholarships for these students. So we'll see. They should definitely be investigating those resources. Scholarship opportunities are a great way for these students to help pay for school since they aren't eligible for federal and state aid. We do have a recorded webinar on our counselor training and events page that's titled Connecting Undocumented Students to College Access Opportunities. If you haven't watched that webinar and you work with a lot of undocumented students, whether they're DACA or not, I highly encourage you to watch that webinar because it's chock full of great resources and information on helping these students. I could spend a whole webinar, and we did spend a whole webinar on resources for these students. So I encourage you to dig a little deeper in that webinar to learn a little bit more. But right now, DACA is hot on the press, and they're right front and center. So definitely take a look at that webinar to see what's available and what resources are there for students who are undocumented. Most of your questions that you have for undocumented students and non-citizens will be on that webinar. So males 18 to 25 must register for selective service to be eligible for aid. And a male, meaning they were defined as a male at birth. So they may have changed their sex since then, but if they were defined as a male at birth, then they do have to register for selective service. Students enrolled in degree or certificate programs can receive aid for 1 year of remedial work if they're admitted to a program and it requires remedial coursework. If they're taking prep coursework necessary for enrollment, they can receive a direct student loan for 1 year. Okay, so I know we have some very specific questions. Let me just go back one slide here and I know we had a couple questions come in and very specific to undocumented students. Let's see here. Okay, so I do have some very specific questions about visas and eligible non-citizens. I'm going to hold off on that. We do have that webinar that I'm going to refer you to because it is a lengthy conversation on helping these students. But basically, eligible non-citizens, a short answer, could be people who have refugee status, for example, permanent residents, people like that. So U.S. citizens, eligible non-citizens, typically we're talking about permanent residents that might not be technically citizens yet. And then some of the questions I might have to get back to folks if they're too technical on the undocumented side and refer to our webinar, but we'll get back to you on those if we can't answer those. Okay, so keep the questions coming. This is great. So the FAFSA, as I'm sure you're well aware, it's now available as of October 1st. And as you're probably aware as well, it asks for information for the 2 prior years. So students filling out the FAFSA right now, who are going to be freshmen in the fall, they're going to be asked for income information for 2016. So this is a big benefit because hopefully they've done their taxes for 2016. They don't have to estimate that information. It's all ready to go. Makes filling out the forms a lot easier. Now, this prior year, what we call it, that is only relevant to the income information. Anything regarding assets or number of people in the family, things like that, that is all based on the date they're filling out the form. But the FAFSA income is based on the 2016 income, and that's for the 2 prior years. So it's only based on the income information that we're looking at the prior year. So the IRS data retrieval tool is available. As you may remember, last year there were some issues with the IRS data retrieval tool because of a breach over at the IRS. However, that has been fixed. So families can use the IRS data retrieval tool, and we encourage them to do so. When they use the tool, you should know that they will not see their tax figures on the screen. It will be masked, and that's for security purposes. So anything is, if the information is on their IRS tax returns, it will be pulled right into their FAFSA form, but they won't actually be able to see those numbers while they're filling out the form. Of course, on their student aid report, as they're reviewing that, they'll be able to see everything there. But while they're filling out the form, it will be masked, and that's for security reasons. As I mentioned already, the asset information is reported at its current value. And then if anybody wants to test out the FAFSA or try it out just to see from a family's perspective how that works, there's a username and password right here, so you can go in and demo it and try it out for yourself. Now, this is really exciting that in 2019, so next year, the FAFSA is going to be mobile. So meaning mobile phones, students will be able to just fill out their FAFSA from their iPhone. So that'll be great. It'll be more user-friendly from a mobile device. So a couple other updates that I just wanted to give you as well here. If families are if they're divorced, parents are divorced, but they're still living together, they should report themselves as unmarried and living together. If they are separated and living together, they need to report themselves as married. So that's a technicality per the feds that they clarified for us, or for everybody. And as I mentioned, filling out the application online, having that skip logic makes it a lot easier to fill out the form. If for some reason families have not done their 2016 taxes, and they should still estimate their income to meet the deadlines, just as we've always advised people to do. Whether it be the FAFSA or if they have to fill out the profile, they should meet the deadlines by filling out the forms. Now with the FAFSA, they only have to fill out one FAFSA, and they will be able to have that information sent to 10 schools. If they want to have the information sent to more than 10 schools, they need to submit the FAFSA. Once they get their student aid report back, that means that the FAFSA has been processed. They can then go into the FAFSA, take some of those schools off, and add new schools on to have the information submitted to those new schools. The FAFSA, as you know, is free. Families should never be paying anyone to help them fill out this form or paying anybody online to fill out this form. Now, it's important to know that federal aid and aid from the state of Massachusetts is based exclusively on the FAFSA form. Now, the deadline for state aid is May 1st. Students have to submit the FAFSA by May 1st. So a student who's thinking, well, I might go to community college and decides in August, I'm going to enroll next month, if they haven't filled out their FAFSA, they're going to be ineligible for state aid because they would have missed that May 1st deadline. So it's important as you're talking to students to let them know, just fill out the form if you're not quite sure. It's not going to hurt anything, and then you've met the deadline because you don't want to be missing out on state aid if they're eligible. But it does need to be received by May 1st. Now that is, of course, well past the deadline for most colleges, so it's important to know what their deadlines are. So a private college, for example, may have a deadline, let's say, of February 1st. So families are going to want to make sure they get their FAFSA in, and if the school requires a profile, which the colleges will use to determine their institutional aid, they want to get that in by the deadline as well. Okay, if you have any questions, just let me know and we'll answer those as we go. Okay, I do have one question about the about the 2016 income. About 2016 income, does that mean the 2016 tax return? And the answer to that is yes. So when they're listing their 2016 income, especially let's say they use the IRS data retrieval tool, they're pulling it in from their 2016 tax return. So yes, that is correct. Okay, so the FSA ID, as many of you know, is a login, a username and password that a parent and the student need to set up to fill out their FAFSA online, as well as electronically sign a number of federal forms, such as the student's master promissory note, for example. So it's an ID that they're going to use a lot, and it's an ID that they'll have forever, so they can use it every year for their FAFSA form. They can get the FSA ID at the website here, fsaid.ed.gov. And they will need to provide some personal information to answer challenge questions to set that up. They do need to have a social security number to get an FSA ID. The student should set one up because they're going to need one to complete and sign the FAFSA. Permanent residents must get an SSN to set up their FSA ID. Parents also need a separate FSA ID to be able to sign the FAFSA electronically. If a parent, now this is important, particularly maybe with undocumented students, for example, if a parent doesn't have an SSN, they can still sign the FAFSA with a wet signature. So they can fill out the FAFSA electronically, but then print the signature page instead of signing the FAFSA electronically. So the student could sign the FAFSA electronically, and then the parent, if they don't have an SSN, they obviously can't get an FSA ID, they can just sign the signature page with a wet signature. And a mobile text will now be sent for a forgotten username and password. So they're making it a little bit easier to reset passwords, which was a little bit difficult over this past year. So parents who do not have an SSN, this is another good point, will not be able to get an FSA ID, as I mentioned. So they should enter all zeros in the SSN field. So For their Social Security number, they should enter zeros for the FAFSA and then do a wet signature to sign the FAFSA. Okay, feel free if you guys have questions to send those in. Okay, so the CSS Profile, as many of you know, is a form mostly private colleges and scholarship organizations use to collect additional information that they'll use to determine what families and students are eligible for from their institution or scholarship organization in financial aid. That also opened October 1st. Many changes to the profile this year. So you can see the sidebar picture right there. The registration section was removed. The left-hand sidebar now shows all the sections of the profile, so it makes it a little bit easier for families to know what's coming up and to fill it out. Students now can list all the parents on the form. So if a student has mom and stepdad and dad and stepmom, they can list all four. And then the non-custodial parent will be able to log in separately and fill out their own profile form. So they're filling out a separate profile. They're logging in just like the custodial parent would. The profile will be asking for the 2016 income information just as the FAFSA does, but it will also ask for less detailed estimates for 2017 and 2018. So that's important to know. So the estimating is still going to come into play with the profile form. There is a cost to submit the profile. There are fee waivers available. You may have some at your school available for students, needier students. Typically it's $25, I believe, and that $25 will get you the form and send the information to one school, and then $16 for each additional school. There's a new student dashboard that shows the application status. So lots of user-friendly updates have happened to the profile this year. We do have a great profile webinar recording that's really popular with families and counselors that you can check out on our events page. It's very helpful. I know I have a question about a demo for the CSS Profile. The CSS Profile also has a lot of easy little demos and quick little video recordings on their website as well to help families with filling out the form. So when families are initializing the profile, they'll have to go through a registration process of 21 questions. Things like the parent's marital status, the student's citizenship status, and that'll help dictate the questions that the family gets on their profile form. Now families just start in with the application immediately, and questions are added or dropped based on the information that the family provides. As I mentioned, non-custodial parents are asked to submit their own profile. On it, they just need to report their info and the info for their spouse. They don't have to list the student's info all over again, and they also don't have to pay a separate fee. So that's good news. Okay, I know we have I think I see a couple questions here. Let me just see. Okay, yeah, so I do have a question. Is there a demo for CSS Profile? Yeah, and so the profile does have a lot of quick, short little videos on their site, and we also have a great webinar on our site in the events page for families on how to fill out the profile. Okay, so let's move on, talk a little bit about unaccompanied homeless youth. Unaccompanied meaning without a parent, homeless technically meaning lacking a fixed, regular, or adequate nighttime resident. So it could be, students bouncing from friends to friends, family, living on couches, sharing housing with friends due to economic reasons, living in hotels, campgrounds, things like that, shelters. They might be awaiting foster care placement. So they would qualify as an independent student on the FAFSA. There is an AP fee reduction for these students, SAT, ACT, and college application fee waivers. So there's definitely some cost savings that are available for these students. We just want to make sure they're seeking those out because we know that they need these free resources. Now, one thing I also wanted to point out, so students who are in K through 12s, they can be considered homeless and living with a parent. In higher ed, on the other hand, on the FAFSA, to be considered homeless, students must be without a parent, so unaccompanied to be independent. So that's a real distinction that we want to make for you. There is a single point of contact being added at each college in Massachusetts. Most are already in place for these students. So DCF is working closely with the colleges and universities in Massachusetts to make sure there's a point person at the college that can be helping these students with all their very specific needs and make sure that nothing's falling through the cracks. So youth used to mean 21 or younger, but for our purposes, students 22 and 23 may also qualify as well. So these students are considered independent, which in turn means no parent information is required on the forms, and they would be probably eligible for more aid. Okay, let's talk about dependency overrides. Who does and who doesn't qualify? So students who would not qualify for a dependency override, and I'm sure you've heard these questions a lot, I get this all the time, parents who refuse to financially contribute or provide their data. So I'm sure many of you have heard from students who've said, my mom or dad doesn't want to fill out the form, or they won't help me pay for college. Maybe they're in an argument with parents, or there's some strife going on in the family. That's not going to qualify the student to become independent from a college's perspective. If the parent doesn't claim the student as a dependent on their tax returns, that also is not going to qualify the student as a dependent. Even if a student demonstrates total self-sufficiency, so they're totally supporting themselves, they're living with mom and dad, but they're doing everything on their own, they still are not considered dependent. Now, students who may qualify, on the other hand, are students who may be in an abusive household, who've been abandoned, maybe they don't know where the parents are, or they're in extended hospitalization. Maybe one or both of their parents are incarcerated or institutionalized, or the parents just don't lack the physical or mental capacity to raise that child. So there's a lot of, situations like this where counselors may be aware more than most people at the school of the student's situation, and that's where it can be helpful to the student to have a counselor, talking to the college on their behalf, working with DCF to, make sure that these students are taken care of, because they can qualify to be independent if they fall within these categories. And that would help them a lot as far as not having to get the parents' information for the financial aid forms and qualify for more aid, which would be obviously beneficial for them. So feel free as we're going to send in any questions. So I just had a question. They considered independent even if they are not unaccompanied. For example, if they're homeless but still with their family. So if they're with their parents, I think I mentioned on the previous slide, as far as the higher ed goes, they're not considered unaccompanied. But K through 12, they would be considered homeless. So there's a little bit of a distinction there. So after families have filled out these financial aid forms, what's next? What happens next? They are going to be looking at award letters from the colleges that they've applied to and been accepted to. They won't get award letters unless they've been accepted. So here's 3 examples of some financial aid award letters from 3 colleges that cost $30,000, and this family has an EFC of $5,000. So their total need is $25,000. You can see that on the bottom line, it looks as though these 3 award letters might be the same. But if you look at the fine detail, the line-by-line items, they're very, very different. So why would 3 colleges that cost the same amount offer such drastically different financial aid awards, even though they look like they're the same on the bottom line? So you can see College A has the best award letter, $15,000 in free money. They have their student loan there. This college has not packaged any parent loans. Not every college packages parent loans. In fact, it's actually not the norm for colleges to package parent loans. But some colleges do, and I'm sure some of you have seen that when you're working with students. And then a little bit of work study from colleges A and B. So colleges B and C did package parent loans, and College C didn't give any grants or scholarships. They pretty much just gave a federal loan for students and a plus loan for the parent. All loans. And the parent loan, I really want to emphasize and stress that loan is not financial aid. It's a credit-based loan that parents have to apply for, and they might not necessarily even be approved for. So it's important for them to know the difference, that it's not financial aid. So very different award letters. So why would the award letters be so different? Well, there could be a lot of reasons for that. College A may be a little bit easier to get into. Maybe the student's safety school, for example. College C may be a little bit more of a reach school, or maybe College C and B just don't have as many resources as College A. Could be a lot of different things, but something that MEFA can help families with is analyzing and going through these award letters and helping them understand the differences. I just want to do a quick sound check. Can everybody hear me okay? I'm getting some messages on my computer that there's issues with the sound, so I just want to make sure everybody can hear me okay. Okay, if you can't hear me, just let me know. I'm just getting a couple messages. I want to make sure you can all hear me okay. Alrighty. So let's talk about what to do if these financial aid awards just aren't going to cut it. The cost in the financial aid award the gap is just too great, and it's just not going to be reasonable for the family to come up with these resources. There could be other things happening within the family that the college isn't aware of, and we might not be aware of them until we talk to the family. That's where the family really needs to submit an appeal to the financial aid office if there is a special circumstance. So they can, they really should touch base with the financial aid office first and find out what their process is. This isn't a negotiation, this is an actual appeal because something is different from when they actually filled out the forms. So, on the FAFSA form, there's nowhere to really write your situation or your special circumstance. The profile form does have room for that, so they can write that on the profile form, but the FAFSA does not allow for that. So they'll want to submit to the financial aid office a letter of explanation. So for example, maybe it's a lot of unreimbursed medical expenses. They'll probably have to submit that documentation and maybe even a summary of their current financial plan. Or maybe somebody's been laid off, so they'll need to submit information about that. Have they gotten a severance package? Are they getting unemployment? That kind of thing. So my recommendation when it comes to these special circumstances is to reach out to the college right away and find out what their process is and what they're looking for. Different colleges do things differently. Some colleges may not deal with the appeal until after the May 1st deadline, and they may say you have to make your decision based on the award that you have. And I've heard that before. I've also heard folks want the information as early as possible so they can make sure that they're giving the most accurate award letter up front. Now, I mentioned it's not a negotiation. I do get the question a lot, as I'm sure counselors do, about negotiating, where there really isn't a special financial circumstance. The family just wants more money. The colleges are expensive, of course, and student is wanting to go to college A that costs a little bit more than college B, where they got a higher financial aid award. In those cases, it's certainly okay to call the college that the student is most wanting to attend, their preferred school, and talk about the reasons why the award letters might be different, especially if it's a school that is the same cost as the other school where they got the higher award. If it's a similar school, why is there a big difference in the award letter? You're not negotiating, but especially if it is, something where the student really wants to go there, and sometimes colleges might give the student a little bit more money just to make them feel better about the situation and to help their enrollment. So it never hurts to ask the question about how they came up with the numbers. Colleges are more than happy to answer those questions, but they typically aren't going to be negotiating award letters. Okay, if you have any questions, as I mentioned, feel free to send those in. Okay, I see a question under there, but I'm going to have to get some more clarification on that. So we'll touch base in a second on questions. So a couple more federal financial updates for you. So the Pell Grant, the lifetime limit is 12 semesters or the equivalent of. Beginning in 2017, students were able to again receive summer Pell Grant for summer schooling. The maximum amount for this current academic year for students who have a 0 EFC is currently $5,920, and the minimum for families who have a $5,328 EFC is $606. The word is that the 2018-19 limits will likely stay the same. Little update on the federal student loans. These rates have been in place since July. So the undergraduate loan, the current rate is 4.45% fixed. That rate for the upcoming academic year will change this July 1st for new borrowers. The graduate direct loan is currently at 6%, and the plus loan for parents is at 7%. Loan fees have stayed steady. They are at 1.066% for the undergrad and graduate loans. Those fees, I should mention, are deducted from the loan proceeds, as are the plus loan fees, which are also deducted, and that fee is 4.264%. The Perkins loan has been discontinued, and there will be no more loans awarded after this current academic year. So current loan limits, and again, this is pre-Prosper Act, is $5,500 for a freshman, $6,500 for a sophomore, and $7,500 for a junior and senior. Now, all of these limits include the unsubsidized loans that they're eligible for. Students do need to sign a promissory note and go through loan counseling online before they will actually receive the loan proceeds. All U.S. citizens and permanent residents are eligible. Now, this is also very important that students whose parents are denied the PLUS loan are automatically eligible for an additional $4,000 under the federal student loan for freshmen and sophomore, and $5,000 for juniors and seniors. So these are additional amounts above and beyond the regular limits. So, for example, a freshman whose mom or dad is denied the PLUS loan, instead of being able to borrow $5,500, they can borrow $9,500, and that could make a difference with some families. So they should talk to the financial aid office if they're in that situation. Okay, so I did have a question. I know we're at the 11 o'clock mark, so some folks have to log off. I can send a certificate of attendance for anybody who needs those for their PDPs. So if you haven't, you can send me a note in the chat, but I will send an email out to everybody. So please just respond to that email and let me know that you need a certificate of attendance for your PDPs. And I'll also send the evidence of learning form for this webinar as well, for those who need to log off. We are coming to the end, but I know some folks have to get on to their next meeting. So we'll just wrap up with some resources for families. And some of you may have seen these. I know we've covered these in other financial aid trainings that we've had with MEFA. But we think they're important and really useful and helpful, so we wanted to highlight them. The college scorecard, here's a graphic of the Framingham State profile. It compares colleges so you can see their average net price, their graduation rate, 6-year grad rate, student debt info, salaries, median salaries. The Department of Education just released corrected repayment rate data, so the website's right here. Now, the salary info does not reflect differences among majors and programs across the college. The data is also based only on students who received federal financial aid, so it doesn't reflect all the students at a school. Another disclaimer about the scorecard is that average annual cost is only based on federal financial aid recipients, so it's not comprehensive across all students. Public school data is applicable for in-state students only, and net price also does not include outside grants that may be reducing costs. And the other important point to note on this scorecard is that loan debt figures do not include private loans. That is a big consideration of the overall indebtedness. So it's a good tool to use, but it's not the only, it's not foolproof, and there are some disclaimers that you just want to be aware of. College Navigator is a great resource tool where students can be emailed a link to their searches. It includes admissions information, graduation rates, academics, average net price, pretty much everything you want to find out about a college, and students can save a search and return to it later as well. Now here's a copy of the financial aid shopping sheet. You may have seen these before. A lot of colleges will send out the shopping sheet along with their regular financial aid award, and this can help families compare awards and better understand their financial aid award. It provides the school's costs and the students' financial aid. It's really intended to help provide the net price so families can compare. School data about the graduation rates, default rates, median borrow debt is also listed there, as well as a glossary. So over 3,200 colleges are now using the shopping sheet, which is a lot. Here's a copy of the federalstudentaid.gov. Great website with lots of information. There are helpful tools for counselors on here as well that you can find, and you definitely want to bookmark this and make this available for students on your, if you have a financial aid page at your school's website. The Department of Education also has a blog that you can subscribe to. Provides helpful information on financial aid and paying for college. So some sample posts that have been blogged about recently: 12 common FAFSA mistakes, 8 ways to get out of the most out of your college experience, and how do colleges calculate your financial aid. So here's the website, blog.ed.gov, if you want to subscribe to their blog. Studentloans.gov, a little bit more detail for students who are looking at borrowing or have borrowed. So great information about helping students understand their loans and managing spending and creating a plan to repay. It's really aimed at helping students avoid default and really making their finances a priority. There's a repayment estimator that they can use without even needing to create a login, which is really cool that they can check out, and you can even use that with students. And there is financial awareness counseling on this website as well that might be helpful for counselors that you might want to use with students. So the financial aid toolkit, this is another item that counselors you might find very helpful to use if you're working with students. It replaces the FSA for counselors. And you can search the tools and resources section by audience. There's infographics, presentations, videos, and handouts that you can download. So net price calculators, great tool for families to use. They're on every college's website. We're always encouraging families, especially those earlier in the process that have no idea what they might be looking at for costs, to go on a couple colleges' websites that the student's interested in, plug in some numbers just to get an estimate. Some colleges do include merit-based information on their calculators as well. So these tools can be really, really great for families who are really wanting to use this information to help in the search process particularly, and just to take a little bit out of the mystery away. So they could do the EFC calculator, which would calculate their expected family contribution, their federal contribution. That's a tool they can use as well, but I like the net price calculator because it gives them a little bit more accurate picture, particularly with colleges that have more sophisticated net price calculators. it gives them a pretty good idea of what they will be expecting, what they're looking at. So there are still more FAFSA Day events coming up over the next few weeks, in the next month or two. There's 9 more locations remaining, so feel free to send families to FAFSA Day if they need help filling out the FAFSA form. The website is right here, masfa.org/FAFSA-day. MEFA will once again be hosting after the college acceptance seminars this year. Previously, last year we called them Paying the College Bill seminars, so we've renamed them after the college acceptance seminar to better show what the program is about, because we do spend a lot of time with families going over their financial aid awards and helping them understand the financial aid award. We will obviously help them understand their college bills and create financing strategies and bill payment strategies. But the big piece of this seminar is helping them understand their award and navigate the next steps. And it's during a time in March and April, during a critical time where they're needing to make a big decision, and these regional seminars can be very, very helpful. It's one of my favorite programs to do. We'll also have webinars that they can go to. And there'll be a little bit of a short financial aid refresher for them as well at these seminars. And we are scheduling them now. So, if anybody has a big space and it's easy to get to and you're willing to really plug the program and work with schools in your community to offer a regional program, feel free to just email me and we can take a look at where our seminars are and see if we can get you on our schedule this year. MEFA.org, of course, has a ton of great information for families. We have webinars, as I mentioned, a few today. All of our webinars that we do for counselors and families are recorded and available 24/7. We have links to reputable sites, so really families only have to go to MEFA.org to find everything they need for the entire process and know that it's reputable, because we're only putting reputable websites on MEFA.org. There's videos on there, calculators, college planning calculators, some of which we'll be using at our after the college acceptance seminars. We'll be showing families those. There's an events calendar for them to find local seminars if they want to go in person. And we encourage families to sign up for MEFA emails so that they can stay on track throughout the process, whether they have an infant or a high school senior that's about to go into college. Now for counselors, we have a few more webinars for you coming up. On January 30th, I'll be doing another program for counseling families with unique circumstances. We have some pathway webinars coming up in February, March, and April. And then in April, we'll be doing a webinar on helping families understand financial aid award letters, which is pretty much the after the acceptance seminar for counselors about how we can help counsel families. Some of the other family webinars coming up, we'd love your help in getting the word out to families, are right here on college admissions, after the college acceptance, managing student loan repayment, the U plan, which will open up in May, and comparing college loan options at a critical time when families might be looking at borrowing to pay that college bill. Okay, so I wanted to kind of get through the last bit because I know we are at 11:16, so we've gone over our hour a little bit. But I'm going to open it up for questions. I'm just going to read through some of my questions here to see if we didn't answer any. So I don't think I have any unanswered questions here. But feel free, I'm going to leave the webinar open for a few minutes. If anybody has any questions, feel free to send those through the chat feature. And just know, for those who do have to get off the webinar, that I will send a recording, copy of the PowerPoint, as well as your evidence of learning form. And please email me back when you get that email if you need a certificate of attendance for the webinar. So for those of you who are logging off, thank you for joining us this morning. and I hope to see you soon at an in-person program, maybe at the College Board Forum if you're going to that, or on our webinar on January 30th about unique circumstances.